The first Mishnah in Bava states, "Hezik chava mazik l'shalom hahezik b'meitav haaretz." The din is that if you're mazik, you have to pay. It's a din meitav. But if you pay metaltalin, there's no din meitav. Whatever it is, cash, you can pay brand, subin. But you have to pay up what you were mazik. As a first step in understanding Bava Kama, it is necessary to clarify what exactly constitutes Hezik in the Torah. At first glance, it would seem to be that monetary loss suffered by the nizik. No property was taken away, and no property was kept by another, so that there is no gnaiva. And there is no gnaiva involved. It is in some way ruined or rendered useless, which makes Hezik to be financial loss. If this hefsid, this financial loss, was caused by someone's maisa, or the actions of someone's property, his behemoth, his boar, his aish, a chiyuv goes in effect to pay for the loss. This analysis is not true, however. Loss suffered cannot be the underlying concept of Hezik in the Torah. The Gemara Bava Kama Yud Amud Beis brings various psukim from which we derive the rule of Baila Metaplin bin Avela. Your behema, if your behema were to kill another's, leaving a carcass, an avela of some value, you the mazik, do not, you if you're the owner of the sure that was mazik, do not have to pay for a whole brand new behem. Rather, the owner of the nevela, the bailim, the nizik, takes the remains and deducts it from the value of the original behema, which the mazik is left to pay the rest. Would it not be for the chiddush of bailim metaplin ben nevela, the mazik would have been forced to pay the value of a live animal to replace the live animal that was killed. That's the havamina of the Gemara before the need for the pasuk. If there would be no such havamina, we would not need such a pasuk. Now, if Hezik is the monetary loss to the owner, how then would we ever have entertained such a thought? And why the need of a pasuk to establish rules of deducting? If a carcass remains in the hands of the bailim, the loss is the original value minus the value of the present nevela. That is all there can be to pay. How can you be made to pay for more? How can you be made to pay more than you were mazik? If Hezik is monetary loss, then there is only as much loss as there is a drop in value. If you could have been required to pay more than the loss, had it not been for the din of Bailam Metaplin, then this implies that damage, Hezik, is not financial loss, but rather is mitzad dechefetz, it's object-oriented. That is to say, that the siba, from this Gemara, from this limud, from this Gemara that learns that Bailam Metaplin, the siba of Tashlumin in the Torah is not the hefsid Bailam, but the destruction to the chefetz, the shviras hachefetz. Now, the need for the limud of Bailam Metaplin makes perfect sense. Previously, there was a live animal, which is now totally gone, and what remains, the nevela, has no affinity with the original live behemoth, since destruction is the idea of Hezik in the Torah. Then the chiv it generates will not be to replace the destroyed object. The Chiddush din of Bailam Metaplin Nevela dictates that even though Hezik is destruction of the chayfetz, yet Tashlumin is based on the loss of the item to the owner. The measure of payment will be dependent upon the effect the damage had on the Bailam. That is his loss. But the Siba of Tashlumin, we see from the need to learn out that Bailam Metaplin Nevela, and he deducts, the Siba for Tashlumin is the destruction of the object itself, would have created a chiyuv to replace a live animal for a live animal, but after a Chiddush Torah, we say no. We say that we will make estimation of what the loss was. But do not make a mistake of interpreting the din of Bava Metapel Leila to say that from here we see that Hezik is indeed the loss. And that's why the mazik doesn't pay a whole new animal. Just because you end up paying the loss and no more is not necessarily a sign that loss is the machayev for tashlumin. Just that it's the basis for determining the size of payments. The rule is tafasta meruba lo tafasta. We are to limit any and every chiddush as much as possible. We showed that initially before this drash, Hezik is not financial loss. It can't be, because otherwise why would we need such a drash? There was only so much financial loss. Take off, deducting what's left and the veil that's left, that's the loss. But rather, you see from the need for Bava Metapel Leila that the Shviras HaChayfetz is the idea of Hezik. So then we would have thought that you have to pay a brand new live behemoth for what's lost. And the pasuk comes along and says that that Bava Metapel Leila you deduct. So we must conserve Chiddush and continue to maintain that even though Hezik is Shviras HaChayfetz, but the Bava Metapel Leila is to say that Tashlumin is based on Hefsed Baila. Additionally, there are Rishonim who interpret the whole din of Bava Metapel Leila to say that essentially the chiyuv is to pay the value of a new animal, and the nevela is used as shava kesef, and in other words, you have to pay an animal, and if there's a nevela left, the mazik is allowed to use that as payment. But in other words, he's chayav to pay for an entire new behema. Why is that? There was no only financial loss as much as there was after you deduct the nevela. So according to these Rishonim, even after the Chiddush HaKron, all there is, you pay the entire new live animal. So even after the pasuk, the chiyuv is to replace destroyed object, the destroyed object is more than the loss. So if you can be chayav to pay more than the loss, then the loss can't be the sibur for tashlumin. For another raya to our yesod, we have the Gemara in Bava Kama, Daf Tzadik Ches Amud Aleph. One who pounds a coin flat, so that it cannot be used as currency any longer, is potter. The reason given is that he didn't make any changes to the substance of the coin, for every bit of the original coin is present, and the fact that it's now useless is turned grama. Rabba then says, he continues and he says, and he qualifies this p'tur. He is only potter if he just flattens the coin using a hammer, for example. But if he were to file it down, he's chayav for the value of the original coin, since there was actually a depletion of material. The question should be asked, the question arises, a coin without its impression cannot be used as money. It's a slug. Why is the case of flattening considered grama? Just because there is no removal of the material of the coin. The answer lies with what we have pinpointed to be the notion of Hezik and the Torah. If the idea of Hezik and the Torah were monetary loss, then there can be no difference between flattening the coin by pounding it or by filing it down. In both cases there was direct hefsek. But given that the notion of Hezik is destruction, a distinction can be made. In the instance of pounding and flattening, what's left is exactly what existed originally, albeit in a different configuration, which does not constitute destruction, says Rabbah. But when you file the coin down, there's a small loss of metal. And that is a case of Hezik. That's destruction. Once we have a machayev of tashlumin, the payment will be based on the loss of the item to its own owner, as we've seen previously. But pounding it makes no destruction. So even if there's a loss, there's no sibur for tashlumin, at least there's no Hezik. There is a din I'd like to add of grami. This grama is not grama. It doesn't mean it's indirect. It means it's a case of grami, and grami is minarabonon. So you would have to pay, but midaraisa, Rabbi's talking on the level of deraisa, you don't have to pay as long as there is no destruction. That's our yisod. Now, having arrived at this new understanding of the meaning of Hezik in the Torah, we turn to the union of Hezik, Shein, and Nikar. We find a machlokes in Bava Kama where Hezik, Shein, and Nikar, whether Hezik, Shein, and Nikar is chayiv. An example would be one who's matama truma. There is nothing physically discernible in the truma which would show some sign that anything adverse took place. It's Hezik, Shein, and Nikar. It's Eino Nikar. However, it will obviously be a loss to the owner. You can't use it anymore. Truma is also if it's Tomei. It's also for Yisraelim, even if it's Torah. It's also for Kohanim if it's Tomei. And if monetary, let's go apply our new idea of Hezik. If monetary loss was the idea of Hezik in the Torah, then Hezik, Shein, and Nikar should be a reason to require Tashlumin. But on the other hand, the Manda Yomer that holds Hezik, Shein, and Nikar is Potter would agree with our understanding of Hezik in the Torah and hold that if there's no sign of change in the object, then there is no destruction. However, we shall show that it is agreed on all hands that Hezik is destruction, but this does not dictate the need for Hezik to be recognizable. Just because Hezik is destruction, there's no need to be able to sense it so that we can have a machlokes whether Hezik, Shein, and Nikar is chayiv or not. And everybody holds that Hezik is destruction and not loss. It might be determined. Its payments are determined by loss, but not there. If there is no loss, there is no siba for tashlum and payments. Now we can let's go look at this. The Taisus in Bava Kama in Daf Mem Hey Amud Aleph. It's Taisus Divrei Maskol Hashta Faste. It's the Taisus states that in the case of a ganef that had a Hezik, Shein, and Nikar, and he didn't do it. It just happened to the stolen article. We'll give you a case in just a minute. The ability to return the now useless stolen article and be potter is dependent on the din of Hezik, Shein, and Nikar. A ganef may remit the stolen article as long as it has not undergone a change, a shinui, relative to the condition it was at the time of his theft. If the article actually broke, even though through no fault of his own, he must pay money instead. And he's stuck with the stolen article. In a case where he stole chametz and had it become chametz shavar all over Pesach went by, and then he's caught with it, he wants to return it. Or in a case where he stole cash and subsequently the government no longer accepts it as legal tender, the din is he may return the useless item if Hezik, Shein, and Nikar is potter. You could say, here it is, and just like Hezik, Shein, and Nikar is potter. So here's your item, and keep it. And I'm potter, and I don't have to pay money for the theft, even though it's useless. But if you hold, but he must make restitution in cash, according to Mandam that holds Hezik, Shein, and Nikar is chayiv, and he cannot get away with remitting the item and say to the owner, here, this is yours. No, since Hezik, Shein, and Nikar is chayiv when it comes to Hezik, when it comes to returning, making a shava for your gnaiva, then you can't make a shava without using that object anymore. You have to pay money. Says Taisus. Taisus just makes an additional comment that he wasn't forced to make. If you're holding Hezik, Shein, and Nikar is chayiv, you can't return it. So Taisus says, he throws in a line, for this is no longer the article that was stolen. And had the Hezik been discernible, had it been a Hezik Nikar, then there would be no greater shinui than this. And we're left. We have to ask, what is the Taisus' meaning? Had the Hezik been discernible, has been Hezik Nikar, then there would have been no greater shin in this. Why don't just say that Hezik, Shein, and Nikar is chayiv, and so too the ganef must pay the owner and cannot return the article as is. But what we see from Taisus' explanation is our Yesod at work. Taisus understands that Madiyam or Hezik Shein and Nikar Chayev likewise holds that Hezik is in the Torah is destruction, even if it's Chayev. Yet, even if one cannot sense the damage, it's still considered destruction. In fact, if it would be recognizable, it actually is the ultimate case of destruction more than physical damage. For in simple physical damage, there will almost always be a part that's left and intact. But in the case of Nishtana Dino, now it's tummy, it's trim, became tummy, it's chum, it's became ulcer, it's currency, but it's useless. It's liris, it's not shkolim anymore. Then the article is absolutely and totally changed for the worse. Hence, the Ganav cannot utilize the article to accomplish Hashava and is forced to pay money according to Madiyama that holds as a Shainikar is Chayiv. We continue to maintain, without exception, that Hezik in the Torah is destruction in the object of Mammon, not its loss to the Bible. When we cannot sense the ruin, there arose a machlekes as to whether that this is considered destruction or not, but we need destruction. By our understanding of the Torah's concept of Hezik, we are able to throw some light on the area of Nezika known as Grami. In the cases of Grami, most Shitas are of the opinion that Mitzad Din, by right, there will be P'tur. But Bezdin will treat it as if it was a case of actual Nezika. Now, there's Grama and there's Grami. Grami is not a case of an indirect method of creating Hezik. Grami is direct. But we'll explain it now using our Yisod. The first two cases of Grami. A Shulchani, who makes a wrong judgment regarding the condition of the exchangeability of the coin, is Pater min adin, but if you hold that Bezin will will even make Chiv of Tashlumin in a case of Grami, then he has to pay. Now, changing money was a job that required expertise, and a fee was charged, and based on the wrong call, money was spent acquiring an unusable coin. Or, second case, what if you reveal that assets to a moches? Moches is a tax collector, but he's a special kind of tax collector. It's in the case of tax farming. I'll explain in a minute. Now, the moches gains the knowledge necessary to strip the person of his property, and you would be chayiv only if Grami is chayiv. It is not Hezik. Moches, referred to here as a tax collector of the type that took as much as he could gouge. This is known as tax farming, in which the ruling powers contracted with a moches who would guarantee a minimum figure that he will raise. And the deal being that all monies over and above the level that he's promised to the government belongs to the moches. All these cases are not cases of Hezik. But this is not indirect here. He directly cost Hezik. The specific factors which constitute a case of Grami will be, you know what that is? It will be a case of Grami when there is no Shvir Sachayf. It's only Hefsid Mammon, but with no physical change to the object. But it's not a case of P'tur by virtue of the fact that the Yasiyah was not direct. Nobody made any straightforward act that caused Hezik. That would make it to be a case of Groma if it would be indirect, which is Pater b'dinei Adam. No, Besin is not Machayev if it's a case of indirect called Groma, but Chayev Medinei Shemayim. The argument for the P'tur of Grami and the reason for the difference between Grami and Groma and why Besin would require Tashlumin, but the reason why it's Pater min adin is that it's not that there was no Hezik. There was no destruction. There's only Hefsid. And Asiyah that directly causes a loss forms the basis of Bezdin's demanding payment in a case of Grami. That's called Doin Dina Grami. There's other cases of Grami. Quickly, if a person were to have a shtar chov and you burn it, now he cannot use it or he cannot. He's at a loss. He would have to prove the loan is still due, because without a shtar, any lova, any balchov can taina paraiti. Also, there's no collection from nechasim mishubal. Next is if a person were to sell a shtar chov and then turn around and be meichel the original balchov, it helps. The balchov is potter, and the buyer of that note can't use it min adin. And he's lost the money that he's put out for the note, but it is a case of grami. And he says, and there's another case, if there was a neighbors and one had wheat, some kind of grain growing, and there was a wall that divided off the next neighbor, which had a vineyard. Now, if the wall falls, it becomes and the two grow together, then both of the two plants, the wine vineyard and grapes and the, let's say it's wheat, barley, it becomes usher because of a din of become klion, and you're going to be chayiv from din of the grami. Okay, but there is the Ramban he has a chibur called Dina de Grami in the back of the Chedusha Ramban for Bava Basra, very, very back. Special little section called Dina de Grami that he asked the kasha, why would this? There's a brayse that brought down at the beginning of Bava Basra that this is the case, that you're chayav to pay me Dina de Grami, and he asked the kasha, why if you hold the Grami as potter, it's only chayav if you hold Dina de Grami, but there are those who hold the Grami is potter, and everybody holds min adin, it is potter. Just the question is, does the person decide to collect in any case? Because it was certainly direct loss. Why should it be potter? And then forever it should be always chayav, because it should be the case of your property did damage. It's your wheat grew into the area of the vineyard and made it climb. So that was plenty of tools. We're going to turn to another inyan that argues that the contrast to our yesod, and that would be the inyan of gnaiva. What is the idea of gnaiva in the Torah? In Bava Kama Daf Kuf Yud Aleph on the days we find a machlokes between Rav Chisda and Rabbi Bar Chama. In the case of a mazik that damaged a stolen article, first somebody stole, then somebody ate it, broke it. Second person, not the very same person. The very same person, it might be still considered one long gnaiva. Rav Chisda allows the owner to collect from either the goslin or the mazik, whichever you like. Right? Rabbi Bar Chama, however, holds that payment can only be had from the goslin. You cannot just collect payment from the mazik. Goslin can go to the mazik, but not the owner. Both will agree that if the Hezik happened after Yush, payment can only be had from the goslin and not the mazik. The only machlokes was if there was no Yush yet, can the owner claim payment from the mazik? Now, Tosfos explains that according to both, the guiding principle is whether there is enough bilus in the stolen article to empower the owner to collect for the zikin. And after Yush, all agree that the owner is no longer empowered. He does not have enough bilus to collect payment for the zikin. Now, if one were to rob a thief of a stolen article, a gnaiva min a gnaiva, the new thief would have been chayiv kefil. That's a divrei hakol. But if it wouldn't be for the pasuk in the Torah that a gnaiva min a gnaiva does not pay kefil. First Mishnah in the 7th Perek of Merubah in Bava Kama. We thus see a difference between gnaiva and a mazik, because there's no question that a gnaiva min a gnaiva would be made to pay kefil of meaning that the owner has a choice of collecting from either gun if he can't collect from both. So why is it that if the second loss is due to Hezik, that the owner might not be able to, at least according to Rabbi Barchama. Now, it becomes necessary to differentiate between the Sibas Tashlumin of a Mazik and gnaiva. For gnaiva, it is enough just to say, to retain a kinyan shaloi by the Bible, to allow the owners their tashlumin, whereas for Nezikin, more is required. We assert that even if we are agreed that the Sibah of tashlumin for Mazik is destruction to the object, not its effect on the owner, but in the case of gnaiva, it is indeed the effect that the gnaiva has on the Bible. It's the loss. When Hezik comes as a result of removal of one's property, then that's the idea of gnaiva in the Torah. And as long as the article belonged to someone, no matter how weak his bias, if there was yish, he's going to lose it, because even if you hold the yish by itself, the guy isn't kinda, and he may not keep the stolen article. However, if there was shina rishus, then for sure everybody agrees that the ganef can keep the article and can make payment. No matter how, that's a weakened. The bias is definitely weakened in such a case. Now, no matter how weak the bias there might be, the owner suffered the loss at its theft. The right to collect tashlumi nezikin, however, is a function of one's bias. Being the owner doesn't create a logical inevitability that the destruction of the chayfetz will cause the tashlumin to be the owners. It is a right and a privilege by force of a pasuk in the Torah. In fact, many pasuk in the Torah, the ones the Arbavas and the ones that Chayivadim in the end of Kachim. If bios is significantly reduced, as happens in the case of gnaiva, the owner can lose the power to demand payment for further destruction. Now, if it's the loss, that's the siva for tashlumin, we don't care how weak his bios was, he's the owner. He suffered the loss. But if it's destruction, then why should he get paid for the destruction he has? Because the answer being that he's the owner. But if it's weakened bios, the Rabbi Barchama is of the opinion that even before Yish, you can't malign from a mazik after a ganef, and both Rabbi Barchama and Rav Chisda will be made that if after Yish you cannot get your payment only from the Gaza. But even if it's hefsid, gnaiva's hefsid, we leave the exact definition of gnaiva open. It might be the taking away of the property from the owner, that is the sibur tashlumin, and the condition is, of course, that there's a loss, or it might be the loss caused as a result of a removal. This is a machlokes actually in Meruba, and always brought when we're learning Meruba in the Ktsais Achayshim and the Sim Mishpat. Just look up Shulchan Aruch Chayshim Mishpat Simon Lamed Daled, and the sugya of the din of Achaylik in Maganef. Our thesis here is that gnaiva is mitzad Bible. The psib for tashlumin by gnaiva is oriented to the loss of the owner, the effect that the theft had upon the owner, in contrast to Nezikin, which is the effect that the Hezik had on the chayfetz. Okay.